The convoy never had a chance. 3 Israeli vehicles rolling through the Zagros Pass at 0300 hours, and then the towers opened up. Autonomous, pre-programmed, merciless. The first truck disintegrated in a column of fire that lit the canyon walls orange. The second jackknifed sideways, spilling bodies across the rock road. The third tried to reverse. The towers didn't let it. Staff Sergeant Lena Carter watched through her scope from 400 meters up the ridgeline. Her finger rested outside the trigger guard. Her breathing was controlled. Slow. "Disable the towers before dawn," the order said. She settled her crosshairs on the relay antenna. A round cracked off the boulder 6 inches from her face. Someone was already hunting her. The wind came out of the northeast. Carter felt it before she heard it, a low moan threading through the rock formations above her, bending around the stone spires of the Zagros ridgeline like it had somewhere to be. She'd been lying prone for 3 hours, and the cold had moved from her fingers into her wrists, then up her forearms to the elbow. She ignored it. Cold was information. Cold told you how the air was moving, how far the bullet would drift, where the pressure zones shifted between the canyon walls below. She pressed her cheek against the stock of her M2010 ESR and ran her eyes down the valley. The pass was called Darbandikan on the old maps. The Iranians had a different name for it now, something that translated roughly as the corridor of necessary violence. She'd read that in the mission brief and thought it was either poetry or a warning, possibly both. "Carter," the radio crackled, low, measured. The voice of a man who had learned long ago that urgency was a luxury. "Radio check, you breathing?" "Breathing," she said. "Heart rate?" 54. A pause. She could picture Chief Warrant Officer Jack Mercer in the forward support position, 12 kilometers northwest, sitting in a folding chair with a thermos of bad coffee and a satellite uplink that cost more than most people's houses. 62 years old, gray at the temples and the chin, hands that still didn't shake when he held a rifle, though he hadn't needed to hold one in years. 54, he repeated. "Good. I was 68 on my first solo Overwatch, 40 years ago." "You were nervous," Carter said. "I was 22 and there were people actively trying to kill me." "Same situation here." "Different war," Mercer said. "Check your wind data. The canyon's going to throw you curveballs tonight." She already knew. She'd been tracking the gusts for 90 minutes, logging them in 2-minute intervals in the small notebook tucked under her left forearm. The dominant flow was northeast at 11 knots, but every 4 to 6 minutes a secondary current came off the western cliff face and crossed it at roughly 40 degrees. When those two winds met above the valley floor, the air turned unpredictable. A bullet traveling 800 meters through that intersection could drift as much as 14 inches. 14 inches was the difference between the relay antenna and the hardened casing around it. She needed the antenna, not the casing. "Wind's complex," she said. "Northeast dominant, western cross current on a 6-minute cycle. I'm going to need a clean window." "You'll get one," Mercer said. "They always open, never for long, but they open." She didn't answer. She put her eye back to the scope and started counting. The towers had appeared 2 months ago. That was the intelligence estimate anyway. Satellite imagery from late January showed empty ridgeline. Mid-February showed 4 reinforced concrete emplacements spaced along the western wall of the pass, each one housing what the analysts identified as an autonomous targeting system. Iranian manufactured, reportedly based on reverse-engineered South Korean technology modified for mountain terrain. The official designation was ATGS-7. In the field, the team's calling them by a simpler name, Killers. Each tower contained a 23mm autocannon, a radar array with a 4-kilometer detection radius, and a targeting algorithm that could distinguish between vehicle types, classify threat levels, and engage without human authorization. No radio command required. No operator in a loop. The system woke up at sunset, slept at dawn, and in between it killed anything that moved through the pass that didn't carry an approved transponder signal. The Iranians had coded exactly 2 transponder signatures into the approval list, their own vehicles and the mining company trucks. Carter watched the drone footage replay on the small screen Mercer had patched into her radio kit. Grainy thermal imaging. 4 towers, yes, but there was a 5th structure she'd identified herself during her initial survey. A low concrete bunker set into the eastern cliff face, partially camouflaged with rock-colored netting. Small antenna cluster on the roof. "Tell me about the relay again," she said. Mercer's voice came back without hesitation. He'd been studying the same imagery for 2 days. "Command relay controls the coordination protocol between all 4 towers. The individual units have autonomous targeting, but the firing prioritization, the decision about which target gets engaged first when multiple threats appear simultaneously, that runs through the relay. Destroy it and the towers still function individually." "But they lose coordination," Carter said. "They lose coordination, and more importantly, they lose the override function. The shutdown command." "Correct. The relay is the only point in the system that can receive a shutdown signal. Destroy it, and whoever built this system loses the ability to turn it off remotely." Carter looked at the bunker through her scope. From her current position, she could just see the top of the antenna array, maybe 8 inches of metal hardware visible above the camo netting. At this range, 412 meters, it was not a difficult shot, under normal conditions. The mountain wind crossed the scope's field of view and bent a thin stream of dust sideways. These were not normal conditions. "Mercer," she said, "if I take out the relay and the towers lose coordination, what happens to them? They just keep firing independently until they run out of ammunition?" A pause, longer than she expected. "That's one scenario," he said. She heard something in his voice, a weight she couldn't quite identify. "What's the other scenario?" she asked. "Let's focus on tonight's objective first," he said. "Disable the relay. We reassess from there." She didn't push it, not yet, but she filed the hesitation away. She heard the convoy before she saw it. Engine noise first, the distinct low grumble of armored vehicles moving at reduced speed, trying to stay quiet in a place where quiet was impossible. Sound bounced off stone walls in the Zagros like a handball court. You couldn't hide engine noise in a mountain pass. You could only hope the enemy wasn't listening. The Israelis were listening to the wrong things. Carter watched the 3 vehicles emerge from the southern approach road. Modified Toyota Land Cruisers, reinforced with ballistic plating, no markings, no lights except narrow infrared strips invisible to the naked eye. She could see them clearly in her thermal scope. 3 vehicles. 8 personnel, she estimated, based on heat signatures. Special unit. The movement discipline was good, spacing correct. Lead vehicle running point recon protocol. Good soldiers moving into a bad place. She keyed her radio. "Mercer, contact south. Israeli unit, 3 vehicles, approximately 8 personnel. They're heading into the pass." "I see them on satellite," he said. "They weren't supposed to move until 0400. They moved early." "Carter, I know." She knew because the towers were already awake. She could see the radar arrays on the nearest 2 emplacements rotating, a slow, steady sweep that had been continuous since she arrived. The Israelis would have suppressor transponders in their kit, she assumed. Every special operations unit operating in this theater carried electronic countermeasures. But these towers weren't looking for transponders. They were looking for movement. The lead vehicle crossed the invisible threshold, some boundary Carter couldn't see, but the targeting algorithm apparently could, and the first tower came fully online. She watched the autocannon traverse, a smooth mechanical movement, unhurried. The machine had no concept of hurry. "Get out," she said to no one. To the Israelis who couldn't hear her, "Get out right now." The tower fired. The sound hit her half a second after the muzzle flash. A brutal, hammering burst, 23-millimeter rounds traveling at nearly a kilometer per second, and the lead land cruiser came apart. Not damaged, apart. The explosion was immediate and total, the vehicle folding inward and then outward simultaneously, a pressure wave that Carter felt in her chest, even from 400 meters up the ridgeline. The second tower engaged the middle vehicle before the first explosion had peaked. She watched the third vehicle try to reverse. Watched the driver understand in real time what was happening, what kind of system they'd driven into. The reversing lights came on, a decision made in panic, the kind of panic that takes over when your training runs out of answers. The third tower didn't care about reversing lights. Carter pressed her forehead against the cold stock of her rifle and closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Then she opened them. You document, you observe, you complete the mission. That was the training. That was what Mercer had told her during her first Overwatch exercise, when a simulated civilian casualty had made her freeze for 8 seconds on a training range in Nevada. 8 seconds, he'd said afterward, quiet and careful. 8 seconds is forever. You document, you observe, you complete the mission. The only thing that justifies what you saw is what you do next. She put her eye back to the scope. 3 vehicles, no survivors visible. The towers had already returned to their scanning pattern. 8 seconds, she thought. Then she started working. She spent 40 minutes on reconnaissance she'd already done. Not because she needed new information, because movement helped, because the analytical discipline of searching, measuring, confirming, kept the image of the third land cruiser's reversing lights from settling into the part of her brain where things lived permanently. She worked her scope across the entire tower network, left to right, Tower 1 through Tower 4, noting the autocannon elevation, the radar sweep arcs, the dead zones where the sensor coverage had gaps due to rock formations. Every tower had at least one dead zone. The designers had done their best. The placement was tactically sophisticated, but the terrain of the Zagros was older and more complicated than any algorithm. Stone formations that had been there for 40 million years didn't care about sensor coverage optimization. Tower 2 had a dead zone on its northern arc, approximately 60 degrees wide, created by a rock shelf that jutted from the cliff face at an awkward angle. A person moving through that arc would be invisible to Tower 2's sensors, not to Tower 3's. Tower 3's dead zone was on its southern arc, another 50-degree window, offset from Tower 2's by about 20 degrees. The windows didn't overlap perfectly, but there was an 8-degree corridor where both dead zones intersected, a narrow path down the eastern wall of the pass where something human-sized could move without triggering either sensor. Carter had found this corridor in her initial survey. She'd mapped it, measured it, confirmed it twice. To use it, you needed to stay within a path approximately 4 meters wide, pressed against the cliff face, moving at a crouch with your profile minimized. It wasn't the towers she was worried about. It was the relay bunker. The relay was set into the eastern cliff face at the midpoint of that 8-degree corridor. To reach it on foot, a person would need to pass within 40 meters of Tower 3, inside its primary targeting arc, but below the minimum depression angle of its autocannon. Below the minimum angle meant invisible to the gun, not to the radar. The radar would still see a heat signature, but Carter didn't need to reach the relay. She needed to shoot the antenna from up here. The antenna she could barely see. She tracked the scope back to the bunker roof, 8 inches of hardware above the camo netting. At 412 meters, that was a 1-inch group at 50 meters scaled up, theoretically manageable. But the wind was the variable. The wind was always the variable. "Mercer," she said, "I've confirmed the shot geometry. I need a clean wind window. Northeast dominant drops below 8 knots during the lull between secondary gusts. That's my window. How long is the window? She checked her log. 40 to 60 seconds on average, last 3 cycles. One shot, he said. One shot, she confirmed. She settled in and started watching the dust streamers on the cliff face below. The wind told its story in dust. She just had to learn to read it. The fourth lull in the wind cycle came at 0247. She felt the secondary gust die. That cross current from the western cliff face went quiet, like someone had closed a door. The dust streamers on the lower cliff dropped and went still. The dominant northeast flow was steady at 7 knots, maybe a touch less. Consistent, readable. Carter's world narrowed to 3 things: the crosshairs, the antenna, and her own breathing. She exhaled halfway, stopped. The natural respiratory pause, the body's own stillness, half a second where the lungs are empty and the diaphragm hasn't started its return cycle. The steadiest moment in any human body. The crosshairs settled. She ran the ballistic calculation one final time in her head. 412 meters, 7 knots northeast. Bullet drop at this range with 175 grain match ammunition. Accounting for the altitude, they were at roughly 2,100 meters above sea level. Thinner air, less drag, fractionally flatter trajectory. Total adjustment, 2.1 minutes of angle right, 1.4 down from her baseline 0. She'd already dialed it in. The crosshairs were on the base of the antenna where it met the roof mount. She pressed the trigger. The M2010 fired with a deep, contained crack. Suppressed, but not silent. Nothing was silent at this caliber. The suppressor turned the sound from a thunderclap to a sharp, mechanical report that the canyon walls would scatter and diffuse. To anyone below, it would sound like a rock shifting, like wind stress on a stone formation. She watched through the scope. The antenna base disappeared in a small spray of metal and concrete dust. Clean hit. The tower network responded immediately. She watched the radar arrays shift, their scanning pattern changing, becoming less coordinated. Tower 1's autocannon traversed a full 180 degrees and stopped. Tower 3 went completely still. Then 10 seconds later, a new scanning pattern emerged. Slower, less integrated. The towers had switched to a backup autonomous protocol, each unit operating independently without the coordination of the relay. Hit confirmed, Carter said. Relays down, but they went to backup mode. Backup mode, Mercer repeated. He was quiet for a moment. That means the towers are still active. Still active, just uncoordinated. The Israeli unit, gone, she said flatly, before I fired. The towers got them. Another silence from Mercer, longer this time. I'm sorry, he said. They were already gone, Carter said. There was nothing to be done. She was already moving her scope away from the bunker to do a full network assessment. How the backup mode was affecting the coverage pattern, whether new gaps had opened up. This was the job. Document, observe, complete the mission. Mercer started to say something else, and then a round cracked off the boulder 6 inches from her left ear. Stone chips hit her cheekbone. She was moving before the sound of the shot reached her, rolling left, dropping below the boulder's profile, pressing into the natural depression behind it. No thought involved. The body had its own protocol for incoming fire, and it ran faster than conscious decision-making. She got behind cover and stayed there, breathing. 3 seconds. 5. No follow-up shot. A single round. High caliber, the crack of it had a different quality from the 7.62 millimeter she was used to hearing. Heavier. A .338 Lapua, maybe, or something comparable. The kind of round you put through a rifle specifically built for long-range work. A sniper's round. Carter's mind was already running geometry. The shot had come off the rock at a shallow angle, which meant the origin was roughly level with her position or slightly above. The entry angle on the stone suggested northwest, somewhere along the opposing ridgeline, across the valley. She had been lying in her current position for over 4 hours. 4 hours for someone to find her and get into position. Patient, disciplined, professional. Mercer, she said, her voice quiet and even. I've got incoming, single round, counter sniper, northwest ridgeline. They found me. The radio crackled. When Mercer spoke, his voice carried the particular quality she had come to recognize over 3 years of working with him. A controlled steadiness that was not the absence of concern, but the management of it. How close? He said. 6 inches. A pause. 6 inches is a message. She had the same thought. A sniper of sufficient skill to locate her position, get across a mountain valley, and range the shot accurately enough to place it 6 inches from her face. That sniper could have put the round through her face. The choice to miss was deliberate. They want me to know they're there, she said. Yes, Mercer said. Why? He took a moment before answering. That's the question, isn't it? Carter pressed her back against the boulder and looked up at the stars. The wind was picking up again, the northeastern current returning, and somewhere across the valley in the darkness, a sniper was watching the place where she'd been lying. Watching and waiting. For what? She didn't know yet. Mercer, she said, who else is operating in this sector tonight? Officially? No one. And unofficially? He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, Carter, relocate, now. We'll work the question when you're out of that position. She moved. She ran low and fast along the ridgeline, staying below the crest, using the rock formations as irregular cover. No pattern to her movement. She changed direction every 15 to 20 meters, never silhouetted against the sky, never pausing in the same position twice. Behind her, no second shot came. She found a secondary hide she'd identified during her pre-mission survey, a natural overhang 40 meters northeast of her original position, deeper shadow, better angle on the northern approach road. She settled into it and waited 90 seconds before bringing her scope up. The original boulder still sat there in the darkness, chips of stone white against its weathered surface. She scanned the northwest ridgeline. Thermal imaging showed rock, rock, and more rock. Whoever was over there was disciplined enough to suppress their heat signature, a ghillie suit with thermal dampening, positioned in a natural cold air channel. Invisible, professional, she thought again. Not a militiaman with a hunting rifle, not a guard who'd spotted her by accident. Someone trained specifically for this, for mountain work, for night work, for the patience required to lie still in the cold while your target moved. She keyed the radio. I'm in secondary hide, secure, for now. Good. Mercer's voice carried something she hadn't heard in it before. A careful quality, like a man choosing his next words with unusual precision. Carter, the round they fired, did it come from north-northwest or north-northeast? She thought about the angle on the stone. North-northwest, maybe 280, 270 degrees. Silence. Mercer, there's a Quds Force unit operating 3 kilometers northwest of your position, he said. Intel classified it as a reconnaissance element. Small, 4 personnel maximum. A recon element doesn't send a counter-sniper. No, he said, they don't. She was quiet for a moment. Below her, the autonomous towers continued their slow scanning pattern. 4 mechanical sentinels standing guard over a valley of wreckage in silence. Quds Force counter-sniper, she said. Elite, mountain-trained. Their best unit in this theater has a designation we don't use officially. Field operators call him something else. She waited. Falcon of the Pass, Mercer said. He's been working this mountain corridor for 3 years. 18 confirmed kills. All long range, all enemy combatants. Iranian definition of enemy. What's the Iranian definition of enemy in this sector? Anyone interfering with the pass, Mercer said, which, as of tonight, includes you. Carter looked out across the dark valley. The wreckage of the Israeli convoy was invisible in the darkness, but she knew it was there. 3 destroyed vehicles, 8 dead soldiers, the evidence of what the towers could do. And somewhere on the northwest ridgeline, Falcon of the Pass was lying in the cold with his rifle and his patience, watching the mountain. He'd had a clean shot. He hadn't taken it. She needed to understand why. "Mercer," she said, "I need everything you have on Falcon. Tactics, patterns, known behaviors." "I'll pull it," he said. "Carter, be careful. He's not what you're expecting." "What am I expecting?" "Someone simple," Mercer said. "He's not simple." The wind moved through the pass below her, carrying dust and the faint smell of diesel and burned metal from the convoy wreckage. The towers scanned. The mountain was quiet. Somewhere in that quiet, something was watching her. She checked her ammunition, noted her position, opened her notebook to a fresh page. 0312 hours, she wrote. Counter-sniper contact. Single warning round. Origin. Northwest ridgeline. Approximately 270 to 280 degrees. No follow-up. Purpose. Unknown. Then, below that, a single word she underlined twice. Why? She moved 3 times before dawn. Each new position was chosen for 2 things: sight lines to the tower network and cover from the northwest ridgeline. The problem was that those 2 requirements were almost mutually exclusive. The angles that gave her good observation of the towers exposed her profile to the opposing ridge. The positions with solid cover from the ridge left her with degraded views of the valley floor. She compromised each time, found the best available intersection of both requirements, settled in, took readings, logged them, then moved again when the exposure window reached her mental threshold. 20 minutes maximum in any single position. The Iranian drones came at 0340. She heard them before she saw them. A high, thin whine distinct from the wind, carrying the particular frequency of small, rotary-wing UAVs. She counted 3 distinct sound signatures. They emerged from the southern approach, flying at approximately 80 meters altitude, moving slowly along the ridgeline in a search pattern. Thermal cameras, she was certain of it. She pressed herself into the narrowest gap in the rock formation she'd chosen. A crack in the cliff face barely wide enough for her body, stone pressed against her back and chest simultaneously, the rifle tucked against her legs. The rock was cold enough to pull heat from her core, even through her insulated jacket. Good. Cold rock suppressed her thermal signature. She became part of the mountain. The first drone passed 20 meters above her. She held her breath. Not for silence. The drones were loud enough that her breathing was irrelevant. She held it because any movement of her chest against the stone was movement, and movement was what the thermal cameras were looking for. The drone continued north. She exhaled. "Drones are active," she whispered into the radio. 3 units, thermal equipped, running a ridgeline sweep. They know I fired. Or they know someone fired, Mercer said. The relay hit would have triggered an alert protocol. Standard Iranian response is drone deployment within 40 minutes of any sensor anomaly in this sector. 40 minutes. It's been 53. They're running a little late tonight. Mercer. She waited for the third drone's sound signature to fade north before speaking at normal volume. Tell me about Falcon. You said you'd pull his file. A pause. Keys clicking on a keyboard somewhere 12 kilometers away. His real name isn't in any database we have access to. He appeared in SIGINT intercepts about 4 years ago. Iranian military communications referencing a specialist deployed to the Zagros corridor. The intercepts used a Farsi word that translates roughly as, "the one who waits on the mountain." "The one who waits," Carter said. Field operators started calling him Falcon. It stuck. More keys. What we know about his methods: he works alone. No spotter. He's been documented at ranges up to 1,400 meters, but his preference is 800 to 1,000. Close enough for certainty, far enough for safety. He uses natural cover exclusively, no manufactured hides. And there's one behavioral pattern that shows up consistently in the after-action reports. She waited. He always fires a warning shot first, Mercer said. Carter felt something shift in her chest. Not surprise exactly, more like confirmation. The feeling of a piece falling into a pattern she'd already half seen. Always, she said, every engagement where there are survivor accounts, and there are 4, all enemy combatants who escape the sector, they all report the same thing. A round that misses by inches. Then nothing if they retreat, or a kill shot if they don't. She looked out at the dark ridgeline across the valley. Somewhere over there, Falcon was watching her shelter in this rock crack, tracking her movements, reading her decisions. He'd given her the warning. She hadn't retreated. He's going to engage me properly, she said. Eventually, Mercer said, but he hasn't yet. And that question you wrote down, why? I've been thinking about it. And? A long pause, the kind that meant Mercer was choosing what to say as much as what not to say. Get through tonight, he said. When it's light, I'll have more to tell you. There are things I need to confirm first. Mercer, trust me 4 more hours, he said. Please. She didn't like it. She logged it in her notebook. 0341, Mercer withholding, 4 hours requested, and let it go for now. The drones came back south 20 minutes later, running the ridgeline in the opposite direction. She pressed into the crack again and became stone. First light came gray and cold over the eastern peaks. Carter had relocated to a position she'd mentally designated Hide 4, a shallow bowl in the rock face at the northern end of the ridgeline, offering a 60-degree view of the pass below and a natural parapet of jagged stone that broke her outline in multiple directions simultaneously. It was the best defensive position she'd found during her survey. The problem was that Falcon, if he was as good as the file suggested, had probably identified it too, which meant he was ready for her to be there, which meant she almost went somewhere worse, just to be unpredictable. In the end, she used Hide 4 anyway. Sometimes the best position was the best position, regardless of what the enemy expected. The alternative logic, he knows I'll use the good hide, so I use the bad hide, but he knows I'll think that, so that road had no end. At some point you had to commit to competence and let it play out. She settled in and started scanning the northwest ridgeline. The sun was still below the peaks. The valley floor lay in blue shadow, the wreckage of the Israeli convoy a dark mass against the road surface. 300 meters from the wreckage, one of the autonomous towers stood in its concrete emplacement, autocannon elevated, radar array turning its slow mechanical circles. The tower couldn't see her up here. She was outside its sensor arc. Falcon could see her. She was certain of it. He had the high ground on the opposing ridge, and the angles favored the northwest position at this time of morning. The light would be behind him, in her eyes. He chose to show himself. It was subtle. A single flash of reflected light from the northwest ridge, there and gone in less than a second. Not optic glare, too deliberate, too brief, too precisely timed for that. A signal mirror maybe, or simply a scope lens allowed to catch the rising sun for exactly 1 moment before being repositioned. I'm here, the flash said. I see you. I'm not hiding. Carter lowered her own scope for a moment and looked at the ridge with naked eyes. Nothing visible. Of course, nothing visible. He was too good for that. But the flash had given her a rough bearing. She noted it in her log. Then she brought her scope back up and started a systematic grid search of the area. The canyon below her became a geometry problem. She was at 2,340 meters. Falcon's flash had come from a bearing of approximately 268 degrees. The northwest ridge opposite ran at an elevation between 2,150 and 2,400 meters, with the higher ground concentrated in the northern section. If he was using the morning light as cover, positioning himself with the sun behind his position as it rose. He'd want to be in the 2,300 to 2,380 meter band, where the angle matched. She identified 7 possible positions in that band: ledges, overhangs, rock formations large enough to conceal a person. She began working through them one by one, looking not for a person, but for the signs of a person: thermal gradient, compressed vegetation, disturbed dust, anything that didn't belong. Position 3 showed her nothing. Position 4 showed her nothing. Position 5, there, not a person, not even the outline of a person, but a shadow that wasn't consistent with the rock formation producing it. A tiny inconsistency in the light physics of the ridgeline, the kind of thing that was invisible unless you were specifically looking for it. She had him, or rather she had approximately where he was. A circle of maybe 15 meters diameter on the northwest ridge, 847 meters from her current position. 847 meters, entirely manageable. Her finger rested outside the trigger guard, and she thought, he let me find him. The flash had been deliberate. The shadow inconsistency was not an error, not from someone who'd been operating in these mountains for 3 years. He'd allowed her to locate him, which meant one of two things. He was supremely confident she couldn't hit him at this range under these conditions, or he wanted her to know where he was for reasons that had nothing to do with the engagement. She moved her scope away from his position. "Mercer," she said quietly, "I've located Falcon. Northwest Ridge, 847 meters. He let me find him." A sharp intake of breath on the radio. "He let you." "Deliberate. He showed me where he was." "Carter," Mercer's voice was careful, "don't engage him." "I wasn't planning to." "Good, because—" He stopped. "Because what?" "Because I'm starting to think you're both on the same mountain for the same reason," Mercer said, "and I need you to not kill each other before I can confirm it." At 0720, the supply trucks arrived. Carter had been watching the southern approach road, and she saw them come through the pass's lower entrance. 3 heavy trucks, European manufactured, the kind of commercial freight vehicles you saw on highways between Istanbul and Tehran. Not military, no markings, no armed escort. They moved through the pass without triggering the towers. The transponders, she thought, they had the approved transponder codes. The tower's sensors read them and stood down. The autocannon stayed level. The radar arrays continued their indifferent sweeping. She focused her scope on the truck beds. Not weapons, not munitions, not the kind of cargo she'd been expecting, given the strategic value of this route. Industrial equipment. She could see it clearly now. The angular shapes of heavy machinery bolted to flatbed sections, covered with weatherproof tarps, but imperfectly secured. The tarp edges lifting in the mountain wind and revealing glimpses of what was underneath. Drilling apparatus. Core sampling equipment. The kind of specialized hardware used in one specific industry. Mining. She tracked the trucks to where they stopped. A turnout on the eastern side of the pass, 300 meters past the relay bunkers she'd destroyed. A facility she hadn't been able to see clearly from her original position, but could see now from Hyde 4's different angle. A low compound, partially carved into the cliff face itself. Prefabricated buildings, a generator array, a diesel storage tank, and at the compound center, a drilling rig. Not large, industrial scale but compact. The kind of operation designed to be mobile, to be deniable. The kind of operation that didn't want to be noticed. "Mercer," she said, "there's a mining facility in the eastern cliff face, 300 meters past the relay bunker. Active. Supply trucks just arrived. They have transponder clearance." Silence on the radio, then. "Describe what you see." She described it. The drilling rig, the prefab buildings, the equipment on the trucks. Mercer was quiet throughout, listening with the focused attention of a man receiving information he'd been expecting, but not wanting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. How long has that facility been there? She asked. Longer than the towers, he said. She felt the shape of the thing shifting in her mind. Not towers protecting a supply route, towers protecting a facility. The supply route was secondary, a cover story, a strategic rationale that could be discussed in briefings and written in reports. The towers were there to protect a mine. What are they mining? She asked. We're not certain, Mercer said, but his voice had the particular flatness of a man who was very certain and choosing not to confirm it. Mercer. A long pause. She heard him breathe, heard him make a decision. Rare earth elements, he said. Neodymium, dysprosium, terbium. This mountain range has one of the largest undiscovered concentrations in the Middle East. The Iranian government doesn't officially know this facility exists. It's operating under a shell arrangement, contractors, not military. The surface rights were acquired through a series of transactions that would take a forensic accountant 3 months to untangle. Carter stared at the facility through her scope. Workers were unloading the trucks now. Ordinary men in work clothes, no weapons visible, moving equipment with the methodical efficiency of people doing a job they'd done many times. Who owns it? She asked. Mercer said nothing. Mercer, who owns the facility the towers are protecting? Another silence, longer than any before it. I'm working on getting you that answer, he said. Give me time. She lowered her scope and looked at the mountain with her eyes. The whole panorama of it, the gray stone in the pale morning sky in the valley below, where 8 Israeli soldiers were dead among the wreckage of 3 vehicles. She thought about the mission brief. Disable Iranian autonomous weapon towers protecting a covert supply route. Clean language, specific, purposeful, no mention of a mine. By 0900, Mercer had satellite imagery he shouldn't have had access to. He walked her through it on the radio while she watched the valley below, describing what the images showed with the systematic precision of a man who had spent decades learning how to read overhead photography. The facility was larger than it appeared from her position. The cliff face concealed 3 levels of excavation, each one carved back into the mountain at a different depth, connected by internal access tunnels. The drilling was deep, 60 meters minimum, based on the equipment visible. They've been at this for at least 18 months, Mercer said. The earliest satellite imagery I can access with this level of resolution dates to 14 months ago. By that point, the facility was already operational. And the towers? Appeared 9 months after the facility, which tells you something about the sequence of events. She worked it out. The facility came first. Someone built it, started extraction. Then at some point, the operation became vulnerable, either discovered or nearly discovered, or someone decided the risk of discovery had increased enough to require active protection. That's my read, Mercer said, and the towers were the protection they chose. Autonomous, deniable, effective. If anyone asks, they're Iranian military infrastructure protecting a strategic corridor. The facility underneath them doesn't officially exist. Carter watched a worker cross the compound below, moving from the drilling rig to one of the prefab buildings. Ordinary man, work clothes, no idea probably about the strategic calculus surrounding him. The nations whose interests intersected in this mountain pass, the decisions being made in distant offices that would determine whether the mountain above him stayed quiet or exploded. Mercer, she said, the mission brief, who wrote it? A pause. The brief was coordinated between 3 entities, CENTCOM Planning, Israeli Military Liaison, and a third party I'm still trying to identify. A third party? A corporate entity with U.S. government contractor relationships, the kind of company that has access to CENTCOM planning channels because they've been doing business with the U.S. military for 30 years and nobody questions their presence in a room anymore. She felt cold that had nothing to do with the mountain wind. The company that owns the mine, she said. Possibly, Mercer said. Probably. I need more time to confirm the ownership chain. Mercer, She kept her voice level. If the company that owns the facility wrote the mission brief or influenced the mission brief, then the mission brief is not about destroying Iranian military infrastructure. It's about eliminating a security problem, Mercer said quietly. The towers protect the mine, but the towers also represent the only evidence that the mine exists and is worth protecting. Destroy the towers in a classified operation, and the evidence disappears. The mine continues, just with different security arrangements. Carter sat with that for a moment. They used us, she said. They used the mission, Mercer said carefully. I don't think everyone in the planning chain understood what they were supporting, but someone did. At 10:30, Mercer transmitted a data package to her radio kit. Encrypted imagery. She pulled it up on the small screen. Satellite photographs, corporate registration documents, financial routing records. Pages of it, dense and technical. The kind of material that took weeks to assemble through proper channels. How did you get this? She asked. A pause. I've been doing this for 40 years. I know people who know things. That wasn't an answer. She noted it in her log. 1031. Mercer transmitted intel package. Source not disclosed. Possible unauthorized channels. She studied the documents. The corporate trail was complex, exactly as Mercer had predicted. A forensic accountant's nightmare of shell companies and holding entities and registered addresses in jurisdictions chosen specifically for their opacity. But at the end of the trail, if you followed it carefully, there was a name. Meridian Resource Partners, LLC. U.S. registered, 14 years old. Defense contractor relationships documented in public procurement records going back a decade. Board of directors composed of former military officers and former intelligence officials. The revolving door that everyone knew about and no one talked about in polite company. Meridian Resource Partners held extraction rights to a mineral deposit in the Zagros range through a subsidiary registered in the Cayman Islands, which held those rights through a partnership agreement with a company registered in Cyprus, which had a licensing agreement with a company registered in Dubai, which had obtained a concession from an Iranian provincial authority whose jurisdiction over this particular mountain pass was legally questionable at best. At the bottom of this structure, a mine in an Iranian mountain, protected by Iranian autonomous weapon towers, supplying rare earth elements worth approximately $800 million per year at current market prices. Protected by Iranian towers, and now targeted for destruction by a U.S. Army sniper acting on a mission brief influenced by the company that owned the mine. Meridian wants the towers gone, Carter said, not because they're a threat, because they're evidence. That's my assessment, Mercer said. And Israel? Israel has its own reasons. The towers control a supply route that Iran uses for weapons shipments. Israel legitimately wants that route disrupted. Their interests align with Meridian's interests at the tactical level, even if the underlying motivations are completely different. And U.S. command? The pause this time was the longest yet. U.S. command, Mercer said carefully, has been given a mission brief that accurately describes the tactical objective while omitting the context that would make that objective problematic. They don't know. Some of them don't know, he said. I'm not certain about all of them. Carter looked at the corporate documents on her screen, looked at the name Meridian Resource Partners at the center of the web. Mercer, she said, you knew some of this before tonight. Not a question. The hesitation in his voice during scene 2, the careful language, the 4-hour delay, it all resolved now into a single picture. A silence. I suspected some of it, he said. I didn't know enough to be certain, and I needed you to be focused on the tactical objective until I had enough confirmed to tell me the truth. To give you the truth with enough evidence that you could make an informed decision, he said. There's a difference, Carter. Suspicion without evidence isn't useful. I needed to be sure. She sat with his words for a moment, felt the weight of them. You're sure now, she said. Sure enough, he said, sure enough to tell you that whatever you decide to do next, I'll support it, whatever it costs. She heard what that meant. An old man with a security clearance, transmitting unauthorized intelligence over an encrypted channel, having just told a staff sergeant that he would back whatever decision she made against the explicit orders of the command structure that employed both of them. Whatever it costs. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet, Mercer said. You haven't decided anything yet. The day passed in a slow, grinding tension. Carter remained mobile, moving between prepared positions, maintaining observation of the valley below. The supply trucks from the morning completed their delivery and departed south at noon. The mine workers continued their routine, drilling shifts, equipment maintenance, the ordinary rhythms of an industrial operation hidden inside a military secret, inside a corporate conspiracy. She kept watching. The towers kept scanning. At 1340, she picked up the first deliberate marker. She almost missed it. She was scanning the approach road to Hyde 4, her current position, as part of her regular security check, and she caught a glint at the edge of her visual field. She brought her scope around and found it. A 338 Lapua brass casing, standing upright on a flat rock approximately 30 meters below her position. Standing upright, not dropped, placed. She scanned the surrounding terrain, nothing moving. Falcon had been here, close enough to place the casing without triggering her awareness of him. Either he'd moved through while she was looking elsewhere, or he was better at moving quietly over broken rock than anyone she'd ever encountered. She noted it in her log. 1342, Falcon marker, 338 Lapua brass, placed upright, 30 meters below current position. The message was clear. I was here. I could have killed you. I didn't. She photographed it with a small camera built into her radio kit and kept watching. At 16:15, a second casing. This one was at the entrance to Hyde 2, a position she'd vacated hours earlier. Same presentation, standing upright, placed deliberately on a flat surface where she'd see it when she returned to check the area. I tracked you here too. I know your route. Mercer, she said, Falcon is leaving markers, brass casings, placed upright. 2 so far. Psychological operation, Mercer said immediately. Or communication, Carter said. What's the difference? Intent, she said. A psych op is designed to destabilize. This doesn't feel destabilizing. It feels like, she tried to find the right word, correspondence. A pause from Mercer. You think he's trying to talk to you? I think he's trying to tell me something without talking to me, she said. He can't broadcast on open channels. We'd both be compromised. He can't approach. We'd be forced to engage. But he can leave markers. What's he telling you? She looked at the image on her camera screen. A brass casing on a rock. A precision-made object designed for a specific caliber, carrying the residue of a spent round that had been fired somewhere in these mountains. That he's patient, she said, that he can reach me whenever he chooses, and that he keeps choosing not to. Mercer was quiet for a long moment. Carter, he said, the intel I gave you this morning about Meridian, I didn't get all of it from my own sources. She went still. Some of it came from an intercept, he said. Iranian military communications. This sector, 48 hours ago. Someone on the Iranian side of this mountain has been building the same ownership picture we have. Someone who's been digging into Meridian resource partners through their own intelligence channels. The brass casings on the rocks. The warning shot that was 6 inches too wide. The deliberate position reveal at sunrise. Falcon knows about the mine, Carter said. Falcon knows about the mine, Mercer confirmed. And based on the intercept content, I don't think he's happy about it either. Night came back to the Zagros with the particular hostility of high mountain darkness. Temperature dropped 20 degrees in 90 minutes. The wind shifted from northeast to due north, colder and more direct, carrying ice crystals from the higher peaks that weren't quite snow, but weren't quite rain either. A miserable, abrading precipitation that coated everything in a thin layer of gritty frost. Carter had made herself as small as possible in hide 4, wrapped in her thermal layer, watching the valley through her scope. The towers were more active at night, their radar arrays moving faster, their autocannons traversing more frequently in response to thermal signals from animals crossing the valley floor. A fox had nearly triggered Tower 3 at 2100. The autocannon had tracked it across 30 meters before the targeting algorithm apparently classified it correctly. She'd held her breath for the fox. The fox had lived. At 22:15, the thermal duel began. She saw him first, or rather, she saw the absence of him. A thermal void on the northwest ridge, a space where the background temperature was unexpectedly cold, moving with the deliberate slowness of something alive trying not to appear alive. She'd been running her scope across the ridge on a systematic grid pattern, and the void had appeared in Quadrant 7, at approximately the 2,310-meter elevation band. He was moving south along the ridge, toward a position that would give him a cleaner angle on the valley floor, or a cleaner angle on her. She watched him move for 11 minutes without announcing herself, let him settle into what she estimated was his new position. Then she made a deliberate movement of her own, shifted her weight in a way that would be visible to thermal optics, let the heat from her body register against the cooler rock behind her for 2 clear seconds. "I see you," she was saying. "Now you know I see you." The thermal void on the northwest ridge went still. 20 seconds passed, then a response. The void shifted. A small, precise movement, the kind that a person makes when they deliberately expose their thermal signature for exactly 2 seconds before hiding it again. "I see you too." They lay across the valley from each other in the dark, each one looking at the other through thermal scopes, and neither one fired. Carter thought about the files Mercer had shown her. 18 confirmed kills. 3 years in these mountains. A man, she was certain it was a man, the movement profiles she'd observed were consistent, who had made the Zagros corridor his territory and understood every rock and wind pattern in it. He hadn't fired. She hadn't fired. Below them both, the autonomous towers scanned their meaningless arcs, and the mine continued its quiet drilling, and the mountain held everything in its cold indifference. "Mercer," she said quietly, "we're watching each other. And neither of you is shooting. Neither of us is shooting." She heard Mercer exhale slowly. "Carter, I need to tell you something about the operational directive, the tasking for tonight." "Tell me." "The original order, disabling the relay, that was the primary objective. But there's a secondary objective I wasn't fully briefed on until 2 hours ago. I've been sitting on it, trying to figure out how to—" He stopped, started again. "The secondary objective is your counter-sniper." She felt her jaw tighten. "Falcon," she said. "He's been identified as an obstacle to Meridian's operational security. He knows about the mine. He's been documenting the facility. The secondary objective was framed as eliminating an Iranian intelligence threat." "They want me to kill him." "They wanted you to kill him," Mercer said. "Carter, I'm not passing that order on. I'm telling you it exists so you understand the full picture, not so you follow it." She looked across the valley at the thermal void on the northwest ridge, at the man who had given her a warning shot, who had left her brass markers like letters, who was, at this moment, lying in the cold watching her through his own scope, and choosing, repeatedly, deliberately choosing, not to fire. "Mercer," she said, "that intercept you mentioned, Falcon building the Meridian ownership picture, what was he planning to do with that information?" "Unknown. Best guess." A long pause. "Expose it. He's Iranian Quds Force, yes, but the mine is operating without Iranian government authorization. If the Iranian government learned that a U.S. corporation was extracting $800 million a year in rare earth elements from Iranian territory through a web of shell companies, using autonomous weapon towers as the security apparatus. It would be a scandal of international proportions, Carter said. It would be considerably worse than that, Mercer said. She looked at the thermal void for a long time. At 0130, the ricochet almost killed her. She had moved to a new position, Hide 6, a ledge system on the northern end of her ridgeline that gave her a better angle on the mining facility. She'd been there for 30 minutes, watching a worker doing maintenance on the drilling rig by floodlight, when the round came. It didn't come from the northwest ridge. It came from below, from the valley floor, or close to it. A round fired upward at a steep angle, either a wild shot or a deliberate suppression attempt from a direction she hadn't been monitoring. It struck the rock face 3 feet above her head and ricocheted downward, the fragmenting bullet and stone chips hitting her left forearm and cheek simultaneously. She went flat. Pain registered, sharp, immediate, the kind that told her something real had happened, even before she'd had time to assess it. She pressed her arm against her body and felt the wet warmth of blood through her jacket sleeve. Not deep, chips, not the bullet itself. She ran her fingers over the damage while keeping her profile against the stone. "Contact from below," she said into the radio. Her voice was steady. The training held. "Upward angle, possible position on the valley floor or lower cliff face. I'm hit, fragment, left forearm, not serious." "Carter," Mercer's voice was different, tighter. "There's a patrol. We picked it up on satellite 2 minutes ago. I was about to warn you. 4-man Iranian ground unit climbing the eastern cliff face from the valley floor. They've been working up for the last hour. They found my ridgeline. The drones must have narrowed your general position. The ground patrol is doing the precision work." She was already moving, crawling backward from the ledge edge, keeping the rock between herself and the valley below. Her left arm was functional, the fragment damage superficial. She flexed her fingers. All present, no nerve damage, but her position was blown. "Hide 6 is compromised," she said. "Options are Hide 4 or going further north to the saddle position. The saddle's outside my planned area." "The patrol is climbing toward the Hide 4 quadrant," Mercer said. "They may have thermal imagery from the drones." She was out of pre-planned positions. The terrain she'd surveyed, the options she'd prepared, all of them potentially compromised. She was being pushed somewhere she hadn't planned to go. "Mercer, I'm going dark for 10 minutes while I relocate. Don't transmit." "Understood. Carter." "10 minutes, she said. "I'll come back on when I'm clear." She went dark. She moved north along the ridgeline at a crouch, away from the patrol's likely approach vector, away from her planned positions, into terrain she'd seen only on maps and through her scope, familiar in the abstract, unknown in the specific. She kept her profile below the crest, moved fast when the rock formations gave her cover, froze when they didn't. Behind her, she heard the sounds of the patrol, distant but real. Boots on rock, the occasional metallic sound of equipment shifting. 4 men climbing in the dark, searching for a sniper who knew they were coming. 300 meters north of Hide 4, she found a position she hadn't identified in her survey. A natural fortress. It wasn't on any map because it wasn't significant at map scale. A cluster of massive fallen boulders, each one the size of a vehicle, stacked against each other at angles that created overlapping shadows and covered approaches from 3 directions. The 4th direction was the open ridgeline to the north, which gave a clear view of the high ground and made approach from that direction nearly impossible without being seen from within. She crawled into the deepest shadow and pressed her back against the coldest boulder, controlled her breathing, waited. The patrol sounds continued south of her, working toward the positions she'd vacated. Voices now, she could hear them, the Arabic-inflected Farsi of soldiers working terrain, calling positions to each other. Disciplined, professional, not irregulars. She was invisible, for now. She keyed her radio. "I'm clear. New position north of Hyde 4, unlisted, natural formation. The patrol is searching my old positions. Good, Mercer breathed. Carter, something's happened. The quality of his voice made her go still. What? A drone strike hit the support position 40 minutes ago, he said. Small UAV, the kind that doesn't appear on standard radar until it's inside 100 meters. Carter felt the cold of the boulder against her back, and the cold of the air on her face, and the very specific cold that moves through you when someone tells you something that can't be undwelt. Mercer, she said, what's your status? I'm functional, he said. The building I was in is not. How bad? A pause. I have radio, I have the uplink, I have one arm that works correctly and one that doesn't. I've sent a status report, and there's an extraction asset being arranged, but it's going to take time. She pressed her eyes closed. 1 second. You should have led with that, she said. I didn't want you to stop thinking about your own situation, he said. The patrol is still active. The towers are still active. The mining facility is still active. And somewhere on the northwest ridge, Falcon is watching all of this happen. She opened her eyes. Mercer, you need to get on that extraction. I'm not going anywhere until you're clear, he said. Carter, I've been doing this 40 years. I know how to manage one arm. That's not, I know, he said, but I also know that you are currently the only person in this sector who has the full picture of what is happening and the capability to do something about it. And I am currently the only person who can support you with intelligence and coordination. So neither of us is going anywhere for a while. She heard his breathing on the radio, deliberate, controlled, the breathing of a man managing pain. Tell me you're not bleeding out, she said. I am definitely not bleeding out, he said. Then, I don't think I'm bleeding out. Mercer, I've applied pressure and the rate has decreased substantially, he said, with the measured precision of a man who had learned field medicine in a different war, in a different decade. I've had worse. She believed him. She also knew that believing him and accepting it were different things. But she had no alternatives. The patrol was south of her. The drones were overhead. The mission was unresolved. And somewhere across the valley, a man who was supposed to be her enemy had been leaving her messages in spent brass. She opened her notebook, found a blank page, started planning. She was still planning at 0300 when she saw the civilians. She'd been working the scope across the mining facility, half tactical assessment, half the compulsive observation of someone who couldn't stop looking at the thing that had changed everything. When the floodlights caught a group of workers coming off a night shift, 12 of them, coming out of the excavation entrance on the cliff face's middle level, moving toward the prefab building that served as the facility's crew quarters. Walking with the particular exhaustion of people who have been underground for 8 hours, carrying their helmets and toolkits. Ordinary workers. She watched them through the scope. Nationalities she couldn't determine, possibly Iranian locals from the surrounding villages, possibly imported labor, possibly both. They walked slowly. Some of them talked to each other. One man stopped to light a cigarette, and in the flare of the lighter she could see his face for a moment. Older, heavy-set, gray in his beard. He turned his face up toward the mountain for a moment, as if feeling the cold air coming down from the high passes. And the way he stood, the set of his shoulders, the slight forward lean of a man whose back hurt from years of physical work, hit her with an unexpected force. She thought of Mercer, of a man who had spent 40 years doing difficult work in difficult places, and was right now sitting in a destroyed building 12 kilometers away with one arm that didn't work correctly, bleeding at a rate he described as substantially decreased. She put her scope down for a moment, looked at the mountain with naked eyes. The mine workers filed into their quarters. The lights went off. The drilling rig continued its slow rotation in the floodlit compound. She picked up her scope again. But the image of the old worker stayed with her. The set of his shoulders, the face turned up toward the cold air. If the autonomous towers were still active when dawn came, and something triggered them, a patrol, a vehicle, an animal crossing the wrong sensor arc at the wrong moment, those workers in their prefab quarters were inside the engagement zone. The towers didn't know the difference between an Israeli Special Forces convoy and a mining crew walking to the bathroom. The targeting algorithm only knew what moved. "Mercer, I need you to listen to something." "I'm listening." His voice was still controlled, but she could hear the effort in it now, the energy being used to keep it controlled. "The towers are still active. I disabled the coordination relay, but the individual units are running backup autonomy protocols. They're scanning continuously. The mining workers are inside the engagement zone." She paused. "If anything triggers a targeting event at dawn—" "I know," he said. "U.S. Command's current directive is to let the operation stand. Complete the relay destruction objective, which I've done, and return to base." "That's the directive," he confirmed. "Mercer, there are 12 workers in a prefab building inside the firing range of 4 autonomous 23mm autocannons." "I know, Carter. And Command's position is to ignore them." A silence, the kind that contained a great deal. "I received updated guidance 30 minutes ago," Mercer said. "While you were relocating, headquarters is aware of the civilian presence. The official assessment is that the workers are employed by an unauthorized operation and therefore accept the risk inherent in—" "That's not a real sentence," Carter said flatly. "No," he agreed. "It's not." "What did you tell them?" "I told them I would pass the guidance to you," he said. "I didn't tell them what I thought you'd do with it." She looked at the darkened crew quarters building, looked at the towers, looked at the pass below, the wreckage of the Israeli convoy, the silent evidence of what the targeting algorithm did to things that moved. "Mercer," she said, "what's left of the tower network? What would it take to disable it completely? Not just the coordination relay, the whole system." A pause. "The individual units have hardened casings. You could disable the radar array on each unit with a precision shot. The radar housing is less armored than the main body, accessible from your current elevation. But that's 4 separate shots on 4 separate targets, each one requiring precise placement. And each shot will tell every Iranian asset in this sector exactly where you are." "What's the alternative?" "There's a master power distribution node," Mercer said slowly. "It was in the imagery I analyzed this morning. A junction box on the cliff face near the relay bunker. It routes power to all 4 towers from the facility's generator system. The mine and the towers are running on the same power grid. If the junction box goes down, everything goes down. Towers, facility lighting, communications, the whole Eastern Cliff network loses power." "But Carter," he stopped. "Tell me, the junction box is not a sniper target. It's inside the facility perimeter, 40 meters past the cliff face access point. To reach it, you'd need to—" "Go in on foot," she said, "through the Iranian ground patrol search area, past the tower coverage zone. And you'd need to do it before dawn, because in daylight it's impossible," she said. "I know." She checked her watch. 0318. First light at approximately 0550. 2 hours and 32 minutes. She opened her notebook to the planning page she'd been working on and looked at what she'd written. Then she looked at the 8-degree corridor in the cliff face, the overlapping dead zone between Tower 2 and Tower 3 that she'd identified during her initial survey. 4 meters wide, 40 meters deep into the facility. She could use it. She had the coordinates. "Mercer," she said, "I need you to do something for me." "Anything," he said. "Stop bleeding." A short sound that might have been a laugh. "Working on it." "And watch the northwest ridge," she said. "I need to know where Falcon is." He was already moving. Mercer tracked the thermal signature on the northwest ridge for 6 minutes while Carter prepared her kit. Minimum load, everything non-essential left behind, just the rifle, 3 spare magazines, her sidearm, and the small explosive charge from her breech kit that she'd been carrying since the mission's start and hadn't expected to use this way. "He's moving south along his ridgeline," Mercer said, "parallel to the pass. Same direction you'd need to move to reach the facility access point." "Same direction," Carter said. "Same speed, roughly. He's not in a hurry. He's moving like a man who knows where he's going." She thought about the brass casings, the morning flash, the thermal exchange in the dark. Different sides, same mountain, same night. "Mercer," she said, "if Falcon reaches the facility access point before I do, he has a head start. His ridge is closer to the access point than yours." "What's his objective?" She already half knew. She needed Mercer to confirm it. "The same as yours, I think," Mercer said. "Shut the system down. Expose the mine. He wants the same outcome you want, for completely different reasons." She thought about what Mercer had said earlier. Expose it. If the Iranian government learned what Meridian was doing on Iranian territory, Falcon wanted the mine exposed, not destroyed, exposed. For that, he needed the towers down and the facility intact. Operational, documented, its machinery still in place as evidence. She needed the towers down and the workers safe. The methods were identical. The motivations were incompatible and irrelevant to each other. "He's going to reach the junction box," Carter said. "He's going to try to shut the system down himself." "Probably," Mercer said, "which means either you work together without working together, or you get in each other's way." She thought about the rifle in her hands, about the mission directive, about the command that had told her to ignore 12 workers in a prefab building, about a man who had been leaving her messages in spent brass. "I'm not going to get in his way," she said. She started moving toward the cliff face. The ground patrol had shifted north during her relocation. She tracked them on the move, sound discipline, the distant scrape of boots, the occasional low voice. They were searching the ridgeline in a systematic pattern, and the pattern had taken them away from the access corridor. She had a window. She moved through it. The 8-degree dead zone in the tower sensor coverage was exactly as she'd mapped it. A narrow path pressed against the cliff face, moving south toward the facility access point. She moved at a crouch with her profile minimized, the rock face cold against her shoulder, the valley below and to her right, the tower's radar arrays sweeping their arcs above and around her. The math was precise and unforgiving. Inside the dead zone, invisible. 6 inches to either side, targetable. She moved 4 meters at a time. Stop, check geometry, move again. The facility's outer perimeter came into view, a chain-link fence, not military grade, the kind of barrier that said private property rather than hardened installation. A worker's fence, not a soldier's. She found the maintenance access point she'd identified from her scope observations. A section of fence with a removable panel, secured with a padlock, the kind of access point that industrial facilities always had for equipment movement. She was working the padlock with her pick kit when she heard movement on the other side of the fence. She went still. The movement was on the far side of the fence, moving parallel to it, moving with the specific sound pattern of someone who was also trying to be very quiet. She waited. The movement stopped. Then, from the other side of the fence, in the darkness 3 meters away, she heard a sound she recognized instantly, a brass casing being set gently on a hard surface. She reached under the fence and found it with her fingers. A .338 Lapua round, standing upright in the dirt. She looked at the darkness where he had to be standing. He couldn't see her face any more than she could see his. Just 2 shapes in the dark, separated by a chain-link fence and everything else that separated them. She held up her pick kit in the direction of the sound, gestured toward the padlock. A pause. Then, the soft, specific sound of an experienced operator giving permission. She opened the lock. They moved through the facility in parallel. He was to her left, 12 meters away, ghosting between pieces of industrial equipment with the complete soundlessness of a man who had been doing this kind of work for years. She tracked him through her peripheral vision, not looking directly, not acknowledging, but aware. Always aware. They both knew what they were looking for. The junction box was on the north wall of the main excavation entrance. A gray metal cabinet, industrial grade, mounted at chest height with conduit lines running from it in 4 directions toward the cliff face infrastructure and outward to the tower power feeds. She reached it first. She had her breach charge in her hand when she registered movement to her left. Falcon had stopped moving. He was standing in the shadow of the drilling rig, 10 meters away, and she could see him clearly now for the first time. Not a thermal void, but an actual person, tall and lean in a mountain ghillie suit, his rifle slung across his back, watching her. Not raising his weapon. Watching. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. He looked at her. Then she turned back to the junction box and began setting the charge. She worked quickly, 3 minutes for placement, using the breach charge's shaped configuration to direct the blast inward toward the electrical infrastructure, away from the surrounding equipment in the crew quarters on the far side of the compound. She set the timer for 90 seconds to give them both time to clear the facility perimeter. She pressed the activation sequence. When she turned around, Falcon was gone. She moved. She was back inside the dead zone, pressed against the cliff face, when the charge blew. Not dramatic, not the column of fire that had consumed the Israeli vehicles the night before. A contained electrical blast, a sharp crack, a flash of blue-white light from the compound, and then darkness. The facility's floodlights went down simultaneously. The drilling rig stopped its rotation. The generator note that had been a continuous background sound since her arrival cut off and left a silence that felt, for a moment, almost complete. Then she looked at the towers. Tower 1, autocannon frozen. Radar array still. Tower 2, same. Tower 3, same. Tower 4, the radar array made 2 more slow rotations on residual power. Then it stopped. The towers were dead. She exhaled. "Mercer," she said. "Power grid is down. Tower network is offline." A long moment. Then, in a voice that had the precise quality of a man who has been holding himself together through considerable effort and has just been given permission to relax slightly. "Copy that. Confirmed on satellite. All 4 towers show no radar emission." "The workers are clear," she said. "The workers are clear," he confirmed. She pressed her back against the cliff face and let the cold stone hold her weight for a moment. In the compound behind her, she could hear the facility workers waking up to the sudden darkness. Voices, the sound of doors, someone calling out in Farsi. They were alive. They didn't know how close the math had been. "Mercer," she said. "Extraction status. Asset is inbound, 40 minutes to your ridgeline. Can they detour to your position first?" "Already arranged," he said. "Carter, what about Falcon?" She looked at the dark ridgeline across the valley. He was already back on his mountain, she was certain of it. Already back in his territory, climbing with the sure-footed efficiency of a man who had been doing this for years, carrying whatever documentation he'd gathered, moving toward the transmission point where he'd send his intelligence to whoever was waiting for it. The mine, intact. The evidence, intact. The towers, dead. "He's gone," she said. "He got what he came for." "And you?" Mercer said. She thought about it. "I got what I came for," she said. "Just not what I was sent for." End of part 2. Estimated word count, approximately 8,100 words. The storm hit the Zagros at 0410. It came from the north without warning. Not the gradual buildup of a weather system moving through, but the sudden, total arrival of a front that had been stacking pressure against the high peaks for days and finally broke through. The temperature dropped another 8 degrees in under 10 minutes. The wind went from 12 knots to 35 in a single gust that hit Carter like a physical blow while she was moving back along the ridgeline toward her extraction point. She pressed herself into the cliff face and waited for the first gust to pass. It didn't pass. It changed direction. That was the nature of mountain storms in the Zagros. They didn't blow through, they circled, the high terrain deflecting and redirecting the pressure front into something chaotic and unpredictable. Wind from the north one moment, northeast the next, then west, then north again. Snow mixed with the ice crystals she'd been enduring for hours. Real snow now, horizontal and dense, reducing visibility to 30 meters. "Mercer," she said, "storms come in hard. Northwest, 35 knots minimum. What does this do to my extraction window?" A pause. She could hear the wind on his end too. Even at his position 12 kilometers away, the front was rolling through. "Extraction asset is holding south of the storm line," he said. "They can't operate in this visibility. We're looking at a minimum 90-minute delay, possibly more depending on how fast the front moves." 90 minutes. She checked her status. Left arm functional but stiff, the fragment wounds sealing under their dressings. Core temperature manageable with movement. Ammunition, 2 magazines plus the one chambered. Sidearm full. The breech kit was empty. She could sustain 90 minutes. Longer if she had to. "What's the patrol status?" she asked. "Lost them on satellite when the cloud cover moved in. Last known position was 800 meters south of your extraction point. Still searching your old ridgeline positions. They haven't found my current location. Not as of the last imagery, but Carter, the power loss at the facility is going to accelerate their search tempo. They'll know something happened. They'll be looking harder." She thought about the dark compound below, the workers waking up to blackness, the facility managers running diagnostics that would tell them nothing good. Someone down there was going to start asking questions, and the questions would eventually point toward the ridgeline. "How long before the facility reports the tower shutdown to Iranian command?" she asked. "Unknown. Depends on their communication protocols. Could be 20 minutes. Could be 2 hours if they're trying to diagnose the problem internally first." She pressed deeper into the cliff face. The snow was accumulating on her shoulders now, on the barrel of her rifle, on every horizontal surface. Her thermal layer was doing its job, but the storm was systematic. It found every gap, every opening, and pushed cold into it. She thought about Falcon. He was somewhere on his mountain in this same storm, moving toward his transmission point probably, or already there, his intelligence upload running through an encrypted channel to Tehran, the corporate structure of Meridian Resource Partners appearing on someone's screen in a government building. Different side of the mountain, same storm. She found she wasn't angry about what he was going to do with his information. The mine was operating on Iranian soil without Iranian government authorization. Whatever political and diplomatic complications followed from Tehran finding out, those complications were not her problem to manage. They were the consequence of a corporate decision made in a boardroom far from these mountains by people who had decided that $800 million per year was worth whatever arrangements they needed to make. Let Tehran find out. Let the consequences follow. Her problem was the extraction window and the patrol and the 90 minutes of storm between her and a helicopter. She started moving north again, toward the extraction point. The towers malfunctioned at 0440. She heard them before she understood what she was hearing. A mechanical sound she hadn't heard from them before. A grinding, stuttering rotation of the autocannon mounts. She stopped and looked south toward the pass. Tower 2's autocannon was traversing in a continuous circle. Not a targeting movement, an error state. The motor system running its calibration protocol without a computer system to tell it to stop. Tower 3's radar array was spinning at twice its normal speed, then stopping, then spinning again. The power cut had done more than shut the towers down. It had corrupted the backup battery systems that the individual units used to maintain their operational state between the primary power cycles. When the main power died, The towers had switched to backup, and something in the transition had damaged the firmware. The towers were coming back up, randomly, incorrectly. Tower 1's autocannon elevated to maximum angle and fired a 3-round burst into the sky. The shots echoed through the canyon walls like something enormous breaking. In the storm, in the dark, the sound was disorienting. It came from everywhere simultaneously, the echoes stacking on each other until the original source was impossible to identify. Then Tower 4 opened up, not at the sky, at the valley floor. She watched through her scope, the autocannon traversing at the facility compound's direction, firing in short bursts at nothing, at the ground, at the concrete perimeter of the facility itself. Random, catastrophically random. The crew quarters building was 200 meters from Tower 4's current firing line. The firing line was moving. Mercer, her voice was controlled and flat. The towers are back up, corrupted firmware. They're firing randomly. Tower 4 is traversing toward the crew quarters. She heard him move, a sharp pain sound, then the sound of equipment. I see it. Carter, they're going to hit that building in... I know. She was already doing the geometry. Tower 4 was 460 meters from her current position. The autocannon was traversing at approximately 4 degrees per second. The crew quarters building was at the tower's current bearing plus roughly 35 degrees. At 4 degrees per second, the firing line would reach that building in under 9 seconds. She had one option, the radar housing. Mercer had told her the radar array housing on each tower was less armored than the main body. A precision shot into the radar mount could sever the power connection to the autocannon traverse motor. Not destroy the tower, but interrupt the power loop long enough for the motor to seize. It was a shot she'd never practiced, on a target she'd never trained for, in 35-knot wind, in a snowstorm. She was already prone. The M2010 was already at her shoulder. The wind was impossible. She had no data for this. Every calculation she'd built during the night had been based on the northeast dominant flow, the 6-minute cross-current cycle, the known pressure patterns of this specific valley. All of that was gone. The storm had replaced it with something chaotic and unreadable. Gusts from 3 directions in sequence, pressure drops that changed her bullet's trajectory at intervals she couldn't predict or time. 46 meters per second. That was the bullet's velocity at this range. At 460 meters, flight time was under half a second. In half a second, the wind could move. She looked at the radar housing through her scope. The mount was on top of the tower's main body, a cylindrical housing approximately 18 inches in diameter, connected to the autocannon's power system by a conduit running down the tower's exterior. The conduit junction, where the power feed entered the autocannon mount, was her target. Not the housing itself, the junction. A target approximately 4 inches across. At 460 meters, in a storm. She exhaled halfway, found the pause, the half-second of stillness in the middle of chaos. The crosshairs moved with the wind. She let them move, tracked the movement, found the pattern in the chaos. There was always a pattern, even in a storm. Even when the pattern was broken and irregular and nothing like the clean cycle she'd spent the night reading. There was a lull, brief, 2 seconds, maybe less. She pressed the trigger. The shot went. She watched through the scope. The conduit junction disappeared in a spray of sparks and metal. The autocannon traverse motor made one final, lurching attempt at rotation and stopped. Tower 4's firing line was locked, frozen in place. The 3-round burst it fired as the motor seized went into the cliff face 60 meters south of the crew quarters. The building was intact. She exhaled fully. Hit, she said. Tower 4 is neutralized. Carter, Mercer's voice. That was... Tell me later, she said. What are towers 1, 2, and 3 doing? A pause while he checked. Tower 1 fired into the sky twice more and appears to have exhausted its autocannon belt. It's cycling on empty. Tower 2 is in the same traversal loop. Tower 3 went dark. Backup battery may have failed completely. So Tower 4 was the only active threat. Tower 4 was the only active threat, he confirmed. She pressed her forehead against the stock of her rifle and stayed there for 3 seconds. Then she got up. The Iranian ground patrol found her at 0502. Not her exact position, they found her general ridgeline coming up from the south along the cliff face route she'd used earlier. She heard them 60 seconds before they came into view. 4 men moving faster than they'd been moving before. Their search pattern tightened and directed, which meant they had updated intelligence. Thermal imaging from a drone overhead, probably. Her shot at Tower 4 had given her position away. She was already moving when the first member of the patrol crested the ridgeline. North, away from them, toward the extraction point. The storm worked for her and against her simultaneously. The snow and wind reduced their visibility, but it reduced hers, too. The noise of the storm covered her movement, but it covered theirs. She navigated by terrain memory and the compass on her wrist, moving through a mountain she'd studied for 72 hours and now knew in the dark. The patrol called out behind her. Farsi. She didn't need a translation. The tone was universal. Stop! Stop now! She didn't stop. A shot came high and wide, the round vanishing into the storm somewhere to her right. Warning shot or a miss in the poor visibility? She didn't wait to find out which. The extraction point was 400 meters ahead. She ran. Not a sprint, a controlled, sustainable pace, the kind of running you could maintain over broken terrain in the dark without breaking an ankle or leaving your footing. She'd been taught this pace on a mountain in Colorado 4 years ago by an instructor who had run her up a 14,000-foot peak in a thunderstorm and told her that speed wasn't the variable. Direction is the variable, he'd said. Know where you're going. Move toward it. Don't stop. She knew where she was going. Behind her, the patrol was gaining. Fit, motivated men on familiar terrain, uninjured, running in numbers. She could hear them, closer than before, the sound carrying through the storm in fragments. The extraction LZ was a flat section of ridgeline she'd identified on the maps and confirmed visually during her survey. Large enough for a helicopter under normal conditions, marginal under storm conditions. The extraction asset had said 90 minutes. She didn't know how long she'd been running. She reached the LZ at 0519. No helicopter. She went to ground immediately, prone, facing south toward the patrol's approach. Her breathing was elevated. She brought it down deliberately, 4 counts in, 4 counts out, the way Mercer had taught her. You can't shoot at the top of a breath. You can't shoot in a panic. You can shoot in a heartbeat if the heartbeat is controlled. The patrol crested the ridgeline 200 meters south of her. They spread out, 4 men in a line, moving slowly now, searching. She had 2 magazines. She had the darkness and the storm and the cold. She had a flat rock to her left and a broken boulder to her right, and between them a position that was not good cover, but was the best available cover on this piece of ground. She waited. Mercer's voice came through the radio at 0523. Extraction is inbound. 8 minutes. They found a window in the storm front. There's a corridor of reduced wind speed moving through your area. It won't last. 8 minutes. I have the patrol 200 meters south, she said quietly. 4 personnel. They're searching. A pause. Can you hold 8 minutes? She looked at the 4 heat signatures in her thermal scope. Moving carefully. Professional soldiers doing a night search in a storm. They were good, but the conditions were working against them as much as against her. Visibility was down to 20 meters. She was prone and cold, and her thermal signature was suppressed by the rock face behind her. Yes, she said. She didn't know if that was true. It was the only available answer. The patrol moved north along the ridgeline, slow, methodical. 2 men on the cliff face side, two on the open ridgeline. They were going to sweep through her position if they continued their current heading. She had a decision to make. Engage and compromise her position completely, or stay silent and hope the storm and the darkness kept her invisible for 8 more minutes. She stayed still. The nearest patrol member passed 15 meters to her left, moving slowly, weapon up, head down against the driving snow. Close enough that Carter could hear him breathing, labored, the breathing of a man who had been climbing in the cold for 2 hours. He was looking at the ground in front of his feet as much as at the terrain around him. He walked past. She didn't breathe. The second patrol member passed 20 meters to her right, then the third, further south. The fourth had stopped near the cliff face, checking a rock formation. 3 of 4 passed her position, the fourth still there. She watched him on her thermal scope. He was standing very still, his weapon at a low ready, looking at something on the cliff face near him. A disturbed patch of rock, maybe, the marks of someone who had been pressed against that surface earlier tonight. He was looking directly at the path she'd used. He didn't look up to where she was lying. She held absolutely still for 3 minutes. Then he moved on. She exhaled into the rock. "Mercer," she whispered. "Patrol past my position." 5 minutes? 4, he said. "Carter, I can hear the rotors on my end. They're close." She heard the helicopter before she saw it. A deep, rhythmic beat cutting through the storm. Different from the UAV whine, different from the wind. The unmistakable sound of a military helicopter working hard against high-altitude crosswinds. It came from the north, following the ridgeline, descending toward the flat section of the LZ. The patrol heard it too. She saw them react on her thermal scope, 4 signatures stopping, orienting toward the sound. The professional reflex of soldiers who had been searching for something and had just heard something that might tell them where it was. She was already moving to the LZ, running low, using the final meters of cover before the flat section opened up. The helicopter was descending fast, the pilot taking advantage of the wind corridor, not wasting the window. Its running lights were off, a dark shape in a dark storm, visible only as a thermal mass in her scope. The patrol was moving toward the sound. She reached the LZ edge and looked back. 150 meters. The patrol was covering it fast. They'd resolved their course now, moving directly toward the helicopter. She had her rifle up. Not to fire, to be ready to fire. The helicopter touched down, a hard, quick contact, rotors still turning, the crew chief's door already open. She sprinted the final 30 meters, head down against the rotor wash, snow and grit blasting her face. A shot from the patrol, high and wide, then 2 more. She reached the door. The crew chief grabbed her arm and pulled. She was inside. The helicopter was already lifting before she had her feet fully clear of the ground. A violent, banking climb away from the ridgeline, the pilot pushing the airframe hard into the storm to gain altitude and distance simultaneously. She pressed her back against the crew compartment wall and looked out the open door. The ridgeline was already gone in the snow. Somewhere down there, 4 patrol members were standing on a flat section of mountain, watching an empty sky. Somewhere on the other ridge, a man who had once tried to warn her and twice declined to kill her was climbing toward his transmission point with documentation of a crime that $800 million a year hadn't been enough to hide forever. She found out what happened to Mercer before the helicopter reached the FARP. The crew chief, a sergeant named Holloway, compact and businesslike, with the flat effect of someone who had done too many of these extractions to find them remarkable, handed her a medical kit without comment, and then, while she was taping her arm, told her that a second extraction asset had reached the forward support position 20 minutes ago. "The advisor," Holloway said, "older guy, he's stable. They're taking him to the surgical team at Al-Taqaddum." She sat with that for a moment. Stable. "He was talking when they loaded him," Holloway added. "Asking about you. I told him we had a confirmed pickup." What did he say? Holloway almost smiled. He said, of course she made it. Then he asked if anyone had coffee. She looked out the window at the storm. The Zagros was gone now, lost in cloud and snow, indistinguishable from the rest of the dark terrain below. A mountain range like any other from up here. No sign of what was inside it. The mine, the dead towers, the wreckage on the valley floor, the workers sleeping in their crew quarters, unaware of how close the math had been. Holloway moved back to his station. She was alone with the engine noise and the turbulence and the gray outside the window. She thought about the mission brief. Disable Iranian autonomous weapon towers protecting a covert supply route. She had done that. Technically, she had done exactly that. She had also done several other things that were not in the mission brief. She thought about what would happen to those things. The intelligence Mercer had transmitted, the Meridian ownership chain, the satellite imagery, the corporate documentation. It existed now. It was on a server somewhere, in a file, attached to a report. It could be buried. These things could always be buried if the people doing the burying were motivated enough and had the right access. Or it could find its way out. She thought about Falcon, somewhere in the storm, uploading his version of the same information to Tehran. Two separate intelligence packages, assembled independently, pointing at the same corporate entity from opposite directions. That was harder to bury. That was two fires instead of one, burning from both sides of the mountain. She didn't know what would happen. She had no illusions about outcomes. She'd been doing this long enough to know that the right outcome and the actual outcome were different things, and the distance between them was sometimes enormous. Meridian might weather it. The political complications might be managed. The $800 million per year had a way of making complications manageable. But they'd know. The people at Meridian would know that someone had found the thread, would know their structure had been documented and transmitted, would know that the operation was visible in ways it hadn't been before. Sometimes that was enough to change behavior. Sometimes it wasn't. She'd done what she could do. Mercer had done what he could do. And a man whose name she didn't know, on the opposite ridge, had done what he could do. It was the most any of them could do, and it would have to be enough. The after-action report was filed 48 hours later. Carter sat in a prefab conference room at Al-Taqadum Air Base, across a table from two officers she'd never met, and a man in civilian clothes whose specific role was not introduced. The officers were professional and thorough. The man in civilian clothes asked most of the questions. The report covered the relay destruction, the tower network status at the conclusion of the operation, the Iranian ground patrol contact, the extraction. It covered Mercer's injury and the drone strike on the support position. It did not cover the intelligence package Mercer had assembled and transmitted. It did not cover the junction box. It did not cover a chain-link fence in a dark compound and a brass casing placed upright in the dirt. She answered every question asked. She did not volunteer anything that wasn't asked. When the debrief was over, the civilian man held the door for her and said, in a conversational tone that was too careful to be casual, "Good outcome on this one, Sergeant Carter. Clean." She looked at him for a moment. "Yes, sir," she said. She walked out. Mercer was in the surgical ward 2 buildings over. His right arm was in a complicated external fixator. The blast had broken the radius in 2 places and caused enough soft tissue damage that the surgeons were talking about a second procedure. He was sitting up in the hospital bed when she came in, looking irritated in the specific way of a man who has been told he needs to rest and has no intention of resting. He looked better than she'd expected. He looked about 100 years old. "Carter," he said. "Mercer." She sat in the chair beside the bed. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The ward was quiet, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the distant sound of aircraft on the flight line, the ordinary sounds of a military medical facility going about its work. "The debrief," he said. "Clean," she said. He nodded slowly. Not surprised, not relieved exactly. The nod of a man who had anticipated this and was simply confirming it. "The package I transmitted," he said. "I assume it went where you sent it." "It went where I sent it," he confirmed. "It'll take time. These things take time. But it's in the right hands." She didn't ask whose hands. She didn't need to know, and he probably wouldn't tell her. And the not knowing was a form of protection for both of them. "You knew," she said. "Going in, you suspected at least." "I suspected," he said. "I had pieces of it, not enough to refuse the mission. I didn't have the certainty to refuse, but enough to know I needed to be watching." "You could have told me." "I told you what I had when I had enough to tell you," he said. "Carter, I've sent people into things I didn't fully understand for 40 years. The only way I've been able to live with that is by making sure that when I learn something, I act on it." He looked at his arm in the fixator. "Even when acting on it is expensive." She thought about what that meant, the career implications, the security clearance review that was certainly coming, the questions that would follow, how he had accessed certain databases, what channels he had used for the transmissions, who he had spoken to. "You're going to have a difficult few months," she said. "I've had difficult months before," he said. "I'm still here." She looked at the fixator, at the arm that hadn't worked correctly last night when she was pressing herself against a cliff face in a snowstorm. "For the record," she said quietly, "thank you." He waved it off. "Don't thank me. I almost got you killed in a mountain pass protecting a corporate mineral extraction operation. That's not a story I'm proud of." "You also made sure I had the information I needed to make the right call," she said, "whatever it cost." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a helicopter passed over, its rotors fading south. "The workers," he said, "the mining crew." "Safe," she said, "in their quarters when the towers went down. None of them knew how close it was." He nodded, exhaled slowly. The specific exhale of a man releasing something he's been carrying. "Good," he said. "That's the thing, Carter. That's the thing that matters." 3 days later, she stood on the flight line at Al-Taqaddum, waiting for transport north. The sky was clear, the kind of hard, cold clarity that follows a major storm front, where the air has been scoured of everything soft and the light is almost painfully direct. She could see for 50 kilometers, the flat plain of central Iraq extending in every direction, brown and vast and indifferent. She had a message on her secure device, not from command, from Mercer, who had apparently convinced someone to let him use a terminal from his hospital bed. It was short. "Meridian press conference scheduled next week. Somebody talked. Not us. Someone inside. Looks like 2 fires are harder to manage than 1. Stay clean. Stay careful. M." She read it twice. Then she looked east, toward the direction of the Zagros. The mountains were below the horizon from here. Too far, too low. She couldn't see them. She thought about the pass, the valley, the 3 burned-out vehicles on the road. She thought about a man on an opposing ridgeline, patient and deliberate, who had placed a brass casing on a rock like a letter and trusted her to understand what it meant, who had stood in the shadow of a drilling rig and watched her set a charge and said nothing, who had climbed back into his mountain and done his part of the work from the other side. She would never know his name. She would never see him again, almost certainly. They would return to their separate wars, their separate countries, their separate versions of the story, in which the other was the adversary, officially, always. But in one mountain pass on one night, they had worked toward the same thing, had read the same situation and reached the same conclusion and acted on it with the same tools, from opposite ridgelines. That didn't make them allies. It made them something harder to name. The transport aircraft rolled up to the flight line. She picked up her kit and walked toward it. She didn't look east again. She knew what was there.